Thanks for joining me for this edition of the Church Security Answer Man. I am so glad you're here with me today because I want to talk about an important topic, and I want to talk about the mindset of an active shooter. I want to just delve into an area that I don't see too many people discussing, and I think it's important for you and I to understand this person a little bit, especially because it crosses a line, and this is important. It crosses a line between being welcoming and friendly to someone who really seems to need to be welcomed and maybe even loved on, but yet they may be in an area of danger for us as well. So it's about reading that. And we've seen some incidents where people appeared to be in a bad mental health situation, were allowed to come into church, and then there was problems. And so I feel it's very important for us to talk about this, and I hope you'll stick with me because I've got lots of important points here that I want to make with you from my own experience, my own studies, and the things that are being discussed about these individuals. And we're going to profile a couple of folks who have actually committed violence or active shooter incidents against churches. So we're going to talk about those people. So let's jump right into this. Understanding this mindset, let's start talking about, what is an active shooter? Very important for us to look at. And the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, they define an active shooter incident as an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined or populated area. So it's what we think of when we think of active shooter. There's no pattern typically. Their method of selection of victims, especially when it comes to the church incidents that we look at. There's many different aspects. If you look at a community active shooter somewhere in somebody's residence or in the community somewhere, when we look at church incidents, though, it's not as necessarily a selection of who's going to be the victims, if you will. Active shooter situations are typically unpredictable, evolve quickly, making it important for individuals to be prepared. That's so important, being prepared for these situations. And that's what we're constantly trying to do. So common characteristics of an active shooter, they've got, I hate to say it, but they've got a history of mental illness. And, and this isn't a one size fits all. I'm not trying to say that. This doesn't describe every active shooter, but here are some typical characteristics when we look back at their lives. These are some things that we typically see, and many active shooters have a history of mental illness, emotional instability. They may have previously been diagnosed with a mental health condition or have exhibited signs of mental distress. And that's just looking back at those situations that we know of. Social isolation is one of the characteristics of many active shooters. They feel disconnected, rejected, or marginalized. So, and we see that they're loners oftentimes. And so not always, but oftentimes there are loners and they feel disconnected from everyone else. And unfortunately, it's part of the facts. They have access to firearms. So it's a common factor for them. They may own guns legally, they may have them illegally, or they may have easy access to firearms through friends or family. It's part of the situation. They plan and they prepare. And it's not, it's not oftentimes something that you and I might think of getting prepared or planning. It's in their mind. They do some planning and some preparing. They may do like a reconnaissance of their target location. They may practice shooting. They may acquire weapons and ammunition ahead of time. So they're planning on these processes or planning for them. There's a perceived grievance or injustice. And then this is the kind of stuff that becomes important for us to listen for and pay attention. Many of them have feel like they've been wronged or treated unfairly by society or a specific group, or they may develop anger. We're going to look at one of those active shooters here coming up just shortly, and that shows some of these perceived grievance situations. They hold grudges, and they seek revenge for these perceived injustices as well. And then you look at the types of active shooters and their motivations. So this, again, why are we doing this? Just to kind of get to know these folks. And I want you to understand that these are some of the folks that we may have compassion or understanding for, but there's a point where we have to draw a line when these folks show up at our church and we become aware of them. We have to sometimes draw that line just to protect our folks. The types of active shooters and their motivations. We've got workplace shooters, and they're targeting their current or former workplace, because they've been terminated, passed over for promotions, or they're experiencing harassment. So that's a typical workplace and active shooter. And we can see those same kind of things happen in the ministry or the church environment as well. School shooters, typically high schools or colleges, and they have a history of being bullied as that violent person or socially isolated. And oftentimes they're looking for revenge against people or the system. And then we have the ideological shooters, and this gets more focused on what can occur in the church environment. So they're motivated by extremist ideologies, white supremacy, anti-government beliefs, or religious extremism. And they may target specific ethnic or religious groups or government institutions. So, and again, this gets into an area that we can see in church or ministry violence situations. Mental illness is one of the types of active shooters. Their motivation, they may be motivated by the mental health issues, and they may carry out attacks in response to threats or delusions that they have. We definitely see that in the church environment when we have active shooters, that sometimes it's based on delusions that they've had. And then we get into domestic violence situations as well that can escalate into active shooter situations where the suspect is targeting their former partner, current partner, or others in the vicinity. And we see that at times in the church environment, if you will, the ministry environment as well. So let's highlight, and right as we get ready to highlight, I just want to remind you that we do have training, and you can take a look at that down in the description area, down in the comments, and there's links down there for you to our different training that we have for you, whether it's armed security, unarmed security, and we also get into not only the basic certificates, but intermediate and even leadership courses for you as well. So I encourage you to take a look at those. Down in the description is the link, and you can get over to an area that gives you lots more information about those. Let's take a look at Devin Kelly. He was an active shooter. You should remember him, one of the largest shootings that certainly the state of Texas had. At Sutherland Springs, Texas, the First Baptist Church. And if we profile or we look at Devin Kelly, some of the things that we see about him, he was described in high school as an outcast. He wasn't necessarily a loner. He was more what they described to him as being popular among the outcasts. So he wasn't necessarily a loner, but he was definitely a social outcast. Lengthy discipline issues in high school, lots. In fact, I think he was suspended 7 times for different things: profanity, drugs, falsifying records, those kinds of things. In 2009, he enlisted in the military. In 2012, he was married, and he assaulted his wife and fractured his stepson's skull during a domestic violence incident. And during that incident, in fact, there's discussions at several occasions he pointed a gun at his wife. He made death threats to superior officers, those who went through with these charges, the domestic violence charges, and he made threats against them. And and while he was making those threats, he was gathering firearms, which was against the rules at the Air Force Base. So he was sneaking them in. And he also made threats to harm himself. We look at 2013. He had a new girlfriend. She reports violence against her, rape, assault. I think there was more discussion about the firearms being pointed at her as well, being held at gunpoint. But I'm not sure about that. But I'm pretty sure that there was more of that going on. In 2014, he was charged with animal cruelty for beating and not feeding his dog. And then, interestingly, right before this shooting occurred, he volunteered at this church for one day in the Vacation Bible School to help with it, just one day. And then he became very anti-religious. He was vocal about it. He was vocal that he was now an atheist and began becoming very negative about religion, about Christianity. He attended a festival at the church 1 week prior to his going back and shooting and doing the act of violence. When he showed up to the church festival that they had, he was dressed in all black. He was acting strange. And the security for that event actually checked him for guns. They thought it was a weird situation. And he also expressed obsession with mass murder. So if you look at this, you look at what we might consider a profile for him or just some facts about him. The reality is that there's lots of indicators here that he's got issues. It doesn't mean for sure that he's going to end up being an active shooter. I don't have the for sure formula for you here. I'm just looking at different things that we want to talk about to get more familiar. And again, the big reason why I'm doing this is because if you have somebody coming to your church or somebody causing issues, I want the little radar to go off for you so that you're paying attention to that person. Or maybe it's for not letting them come into church that day because they've been a problem or they're showing up and things don't seem right, and that you're more familiar with this so that you can make an educated decision to maybe turn them away that day and not allow them to come in to the church. So that's why we're talking about this stuff. And if you look at Devin Kelly here, there are lots of signs and indicators that something is not right with him throughout his later life, just for a few years before this incident occurred. And I think that's very important, whether you and I become aware of it. And in fact, this church, there's more stuff that I'm not going into where he was actually texting relatives and making some threats and via text to people who were attending this church. And so there's all kinds of flags with Devin Kelly here that if you and I get wind of any of those, we should be paying attention to that. That becomes very, very important. Psychological profile of an active shooter, just a few facts as I study it, become aware of it. They're antisocial traits. They have those antisocial traits, such as lack of empathy for others, a disregard for social norms and rules, and a history of aggressive behavior. Narcissism, paranoia, depression, and anxiety, social isolation, and obsession with violence. We talked about antisocial traits, narcissism. They may exhibit narcissistic traits such as grandiose sense of self-importance, how big of a deal they are, a need for attention and recognition, and a sense of entitlement. So if you're noting some of these things about people, then these people should be folks that we should be watching, paying attention to, and honestly, in some cases, maybe loving on them a little bit more, being more friendly with them, having some conversations with them so you get to know them better. A couple of good reasons for getting to know them better. One, you might end up learning more about them and realizing you're right. Or you may end up realizing that, hey, maybe that's not that big of a deal. And the other issue is that you become on better terms with them. You become more friendly with them. And that may actually deter them or give you an opportunity to deter them if they were to decide to become violent. It may give you that rapport with them because you've been being friendly with them and asking them questions and talking to them and visiting them week after week, and really begin to build rapport and get to know them better. So many benefits to doing that in this situation. Then we look at paranoia. An active shooter may exhibit paranoia or a sense of persecution, and they feel like they've been wronged or targeted or they're being watched by others, that kind of thing. Important things for us to pay attention to. And then we get into depression and anxiety. And active shooters struggle with depression and anxiety oftentimes. And so that leads them to this hopelessness and desperation, to where they look at what happens many times and they realize this is they're going to end up committing suicide after this violent act, or they're going to end up being killed during this violent act. We look at social isolation, which we've talked about, and they feel disconnected from other people, rejected, marginalized by society. They feel like an outcast. And so very important for us, if we know this is going on with someone, we want to pay attention to them. And again, that's the cool thing about security is you can wear both hats. Both you're talking to them because you're trying to get to know them more and see if they're a danger or prove that they're not. And at the same time, you're building some rapport with them and ministering to them as well, that's cool about the security concept. Obsession with violence. We hear this time and time again where they're interested in firearms, violent movies, violent video games, military or law enforcement issues. And, and I got to put my disclaimer in here that, this isn't a hard and fast rule that these things create an active shooter. These are just some things that we can look for, some unique characteristics about a person, and get to know them better. That's what this oftentimes is really about, is getting to know them a little bit better. It's these psychological characteristics may be present in some active shooters, but they're not necessarily indicators that for sure somebody's going to become an active shooter. And so there's many people that exhibit some of these characteristics, or maybe even all of them, that don't become violent people. And so I just want to make sure and mention that just a little bit here. Next, we want to look a little bit into this, because it helps us see the characteristics that we're talking about, the studies and my studies. It helps us see that, yeah, these things are right on. We look at Keith Kinnunen from the White Settlement shooting at a church in White Settlement, Texas. And, this is the guy that showed up in a fake beard and fake hair, long wig, and an overcoat, and was carrying a concealed weapon underneath, and ended up having a quick shooting that only lasted about 4.5 to 5 seconds. And, but he was still able to kill 2 persons, unfortunately, within that church. So a little bit about him that we didn't know. We don't see readily in many news stories, but his ex-wife said she knew he was crazy. I knew he was mentally ill. She said at one point, I didn't know he was crazy enough to do this, though, to become violent at church. He used to attend church with his ex-wife, and he was frightening to her. And after 6 years of marriage, she ended it because it just got worse and worse. He had guns. And the ex-wife said in an interview she wasn't sure he was supposed to have those guns, but he did have them. He had drug issues that seemed to make him worse. According to her, and her quote was, it messed with his head. And his ex-wife said he was battling a demon, and he was not nice to anyone, especially in the last few years. As she would run into him, he was not a nice person. The church congregation, this is some stuff you may not know. He was actually coming around the church quite a bit, and they were feeding him. They were giving him food, but they refused to give him money. And I believe that that's because they could see he had a drug issue. So they didn't give him money, but they helped him eat. They fed him. But he grew angry, according to the pastor in an interview. He said that Keith grew angry because they wouldn't give him money. And the minister said that he had seen him on multiple occasions. He had been there on multiple occasions. And that day, and apparently the discussion is that he became angrier and angrier because they would not give him actual money. They were only giving him food. So that's important for us to pay attention to. Something that we typically do. We'll give out gas cards or food or those kind of things, but we don't give out cash. So keep that kind of stuff in mind. And on the day of that shooting, like I mentioned, he showed up in a wig and a trench coat, and he drew attention from security. And I'm certainly not critical of them, but I do want us to be thinking about, at what point are we going to say, maybe this person shouldn't come in? When there's too many red flags, at what point should this person not come in? Especially if we know he's had issues and now he's showing up in a disguise and a big trench coat, that kind of thing at some point. And that's what I want you through this conversation to be more empowered to make those decisions of, maybe this time this person doesn't come in. Maybe we minister to them outside, or maybe we make an appointment to minister to them later at some point. That kind of stuff is what I want you to be able to make a better decision about. What triggers may increase the likelihood of someone becoming an active shooter? Social isolation. We've talked about these things, are many of the characteristics, but what ones of this list would increase the likelihood of someone becoming that active shooter? And, social isolation, mental health. And I don't know the formula for this. I don't think there's a for sure characteristic that we can say everybody that has this is an active shooter, or if they have all of these, they're an active shooter, because I don't believe that's true. Mental illness, personal grievances, ideological beliefs, access to firearms. I mean, all of these issues are sometimes mentioned as triggers or as part of a background of somebody that we know became an active shooter. So we want to be paying attention to those things. Strategies for preventing an active shooter. And here's where we kind of start pulling this stuff together. We already talked about the interaction, visiting with them more if you know these things ahead of time. Spend some more time with them, get to know them better. And I think that's our job as security. It's not just to say, get out. I think it's also for us to minister to these people at the same time that we're interviewing them because of security concerns, and we're building rapport with them as well. So I think it's cool, but I think it's part of our job task that we should be doing. Develop a comprehensive security plan. You and I need to be on top of our game here. We need to be working towards it. Doesn't mean we have a written plan right now or we have a comprehensive plan, but we're working on that. We should be training our people, training at different levels, the teachers, our greeters, and our security folks, of course, and even our worship team. What are we going to do if these kind of things happen? And what do you want them to do? So some discussion about that and meeting with their leaders to get this stuff ironed out. We're not forcing them to do something, but we're making plans, and we're talking to our teams about what they could do or should do, and talking with their leaders. We certainly want to know our people, conducting the background checks. We want a visible presence. Whenever we can have one or two people with lanyards, with a little name tag walking around in the parking lot, hey, that is a great thing. We want that visible security presence. We want somebody at the front door greeting people, being friendly, but they're also there being seen. And I don't think, it hurts when I have extra people on for our security team. I'll throw a picture on Facebook, and we don't call ourselves security. We call ourselves guest services, but I'll throw a picture of us on Facebook so that we're kind of putting that publicity out there in case somebody's scoping us out, that we've got lots of people around to help during the service, before, after, those kind of things. So we want that. And, and we want to monitor social media. We want to be watching for anybody that's angry with us or ticked off. And then we want to try to identify those people and go over and check out their Facebook if you can, their page, and or try to get to know them a little bit better, kind of thing. If they're not happy with you, pay attention to that stuff whenever you have an opportunity. And really, we're just talking, and really with all of these points, we're talking about creating a culture of safety within your church, within your ministry. That is the important stuff. And coordinate certainly with law enforcement. Any knowledge you can gather from them, and more friendly you can get with them. Maybe you can get some training from them for your team. And we're just coordinating with them and getting to know them better, asking them what they want from us, letting them visit our building, give them tours, whatever we can do to get on. Maybe just give them coffee on Saturday or Sunday mornings whenever you meet. Invite them to stop by and have some coffee. Any of those kind of things, I think, is great to coordinate with law enforcement. And maybe they'll drive through the parking lot once in a while and let their vehicle be seen, if you will. So, this is lots of things to think about, but I really want you to feel stronger about this idea of stopping somebody at the door and maybe not letting them come in. And if we have opportunities before that, I want to encourage you to work on it, get to know them better, visit with them, find out just how many issues they have versus maybe they don't have that many issues. Sometimes we can find out another explanation for some of the things that we're seeing. But then we're also being friendly with them. We're loving on them. We're being a great witness to them, as we should. And we're building rapport with them on the security. So many levels that we can work on this if we think about some of these characteristics that we've just talked about here and that we've been looking at. I want to encourage you to get stronger on those characteristics, more knowledgeable, share this with your team, and then be ready to make a decision. And we've got to consult with our leaders, obviously, on what components mean we can say no to somebody or come back later somebody. And I want you to be empowered and seek the information that you need to make that decision so that we're not letting these folks in. So I encourage you to take a look at our stuff. Again, comments down below. Take a look at our security team training, and like and subscribe to this channel if you have an opportunity. I'd love to have you be part of our community. I want to get this information out, and I want you to be more solid in the information and good information that you get relative to this important task of taking care of your people and your ministry. And take a look at this video coming up on your screen now. I think that's the next thing that I would encourage you to visit with, take a look at, and join me in that video.